Welcome to DCB today. This is being webcast, which is great, and there are no fire alarm practices planned for today, so if the fire alarm sounds, then it's exit by the same entrance as you came in through at the main doors. Because it's being webcast and it's quite busy today, I'm going to ask the committee to introduce themselves if they don't mind. We'll start over here.
Councillor Tony Dyer, Southfield Ward.
Councillor Guy Palmy, Cotton Ward.
Councillor Andrew Brown, Hengrove and Church Park Ward.
Councillor Katja Hernchen, Brislington East Ward.
Councillor Mira Cole, Ashley Ward.
Councillor Fabian Breckles, St George Troopers Hill.
Fabulous. And I'm Councillor Annie Stafford Townsend for Central Ward. Do we have any apologies for absence today? No. Okay, fabulous. Do we have any declarations of interest on today's agenda? Lovely. Minutes of the previous meeting. Anybody have any issues with those, or are we happy to sign them off? I'll take that as a yes, seeing as nobody has an issue with that. Okay, so then item number 5 on the agenda, we have appeals, which is over to you, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Just one update for today, really, and that relates to item 16, which is on page also 16 of the papers, and that relates to a called-in application on the former Police Dog and Horse Training Centre on Clanage Road. This was the site of a proposal by the Caravan Club to relocate there. It was something I'm pretty sure did come to DCB, but previous municipal year, where the committee resolved to grant permission. It was called in by the Secretary of State. Public inquiry to hear from all parties was held towards the end of July and beginning of August this year. The reason that I'm raising it today is that we had correspondence from the Planning Inspectorate earlier this week or late last week just to confirm the timescale for the Secretary of State's decision, and that is that we're told that the Secretary of State is due to issue a decision either on or before the 9th of February. So that's the kind of timescale we'd normally expect. So we'll keep our eyes peeled on or around that date, Chair. And obviously, as and when that decision comes through, we'll inform the committee of what that decision is. Aside from that, Chair, no specific updates unless committee had any particular questions.
No, I think we're good. Any enforcement notices to tell us about? Yes,
Chair. After a few meetings where I've been saying no notices, they're coming soon. Glad to say, as you can see on page 24, 2 notices have been served since the previous meeting. In fact, I saw notification that we'd actually served a further notice as well, but that'll be formally reported next time around. So, I mean, the team haven't stopped working in terms of enforcement. Sometimes it just takes time for investigations to kind of come to a conclusion where legal then have all the information they need to formally serve notice on properties where we haven't been able to find a resolution. So it's always quite healthy, really, to have one or two notices per meeting to show that, you know, the system can bite when it needs to, and so there's good evidence there this time around, Chair, that that is happening. So happy to take any questions if committee have any.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions about that? Nope. Okay, great. Okay, so then we're going to move on to item number 7 on the agenda. Just before we do so, Chris and Leslie, hello. Hello. So we're being webcast today, so could you please both introduce yourself to those sort of on the webcast viewing and also in the public gallery, please? No, we've already gone around the room, but if you could just introduce yourselves as you were late. Using the mic though, please, Leslie.
I'm sorry, but I can't vote in this one because I was late.
No, you can, because we haven't started public forum yet.
Sorry?
We haven't started public forum yet, so you can vote.
Oh, right, sorry, but...
But if you could just tell everybody who you are.
Sorry?
Can you just tell everybody who you are?
Oh, right, Leslie Alexander.
Thank you. And Chris?
Chris Windows, Councillor Henbury and Braintree.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move to the public forum. It's great to see that we have lots of members of the public here. What we'll do is we'll take the public forum for each item immediately before we then discuss it. So we'll be taking the Windmill Hill pub first and then Romney Avenue second. There is a 1 minute limit for your speaking, and the traffic light system over here, so it'll go to green when you've got the full minute, amber when you've got half a minute, and red when you've run out of time. Somebody will be coming around with a roving mic so that you can be heard. And we've read your public statements, your statement to the committee, so please sort of summarise them as best as possible rather than sort of taking up all of your time just reading it out. That would be great. And then after that, we're going to move to the officer presentation. From your statements, I appreciate that you may not necessarily agree with everything that he may say, but I must ask you to not call out and heckle during that time, because the public forum is the part that you can speak, okay? And then after that, the committee will ask questions of clarification, and after that we'll move to a debate. Again, that has to be a conversation between us as opposed to the entire room, just because it will descend into absolute chaos. It's for your own benefit that we're able to discuss it as legibly as possible, okay? I hope that all makes perfect sense. So for the first person to speak is Hannah Cluin.
Is this on? Yes. Thank you. All the alternative provision listed by the planning officer is outside of the 400 metres acceptable by the IHT. Manual for streets requires pedestrian routes to be multifunctional and not segregated from motor traffic, as this gives rise to personal security issues at night for protected groups. All the planning officer's listed walking routes include alleyways and paths that are segregated and not multifunctional, except the Rising Sun. Avon and Somerset Police highlighted East Street as an area of particular concern for antisocial behaviour. Therefore, routes through East Street are not safe at night. You've all been sent the shortest safe walking routes, and none is within the required locality of 800 metres or 10 minutes, except the Rising Sun. One pub is not a diverse range of provision within the locality. Therefore, change of use of this public house, established for over 150 years, must not be permitted under Clause 2 of DM6. The existence of a publican ready to buy at above market value clearly shows viability under Clause 1, and therefore, based on policy DM6, the committee must reject this application for change of use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cynthia Goldstein, please.
Shall I start? Hello?
Yep, go for it.
The Windmill pub is an important and much-loved hub of our community, as the 270 objections in total to change use and under 7 supporting the flat show. The planning officer's report, which claims there is a diverse range of public provision within this community, is totally misleading. Those listed as alternative provisions do not add up. The community centre, for one, is a paying members club with limited opening hours. The city farm and the church hall only open in the evening for specific events. The greenhouse is not even open to the public. And Dame Emily's skateboard park, need I say more? As a single woman, I felt safe walking and drinking in the Windmill pub. This must not be dismissed, please. Windmill Hill is identified as an area of low antisocial behaviour. East Street identified by the police as an area of high antisocial behaviour. I do not feel safe walking there after dark for a drink, and I deeply resent the planning officer's report telling me that I should. There is an offer of £35,000 above market value on the table at the moment. Please save this pub. It has been one for over 150 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, Liz Lewington, please. Liz Lewington? She's not well. Okay, thank you very much. Do we have Georgina Griffiths?
I'm a psychiatrist and have worked as a psychiatrist and physician in Bristol for the last 7 years, and we are currently experiencing an epidemic of loneliness. What we need is more community spaces and not for them to be taken away. Once community space is taken away, it is never returned, and the effects seen on the population are seen both at the time of removal and for years to come. We have a pub and we have a bar in a community space that is much loved. The other pubs that have been offered in the document are not suitable for people that are elderly, single women, or people with disabilities in Windmill Hill to attend. It would require walking in areas that are dark and with street crime. We cannot allow that for our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lisa Stone, please. That's if you wanted to. Do you want to?
Thank you. Hello. Yes, good afternoon. I'd just like to, I'm obviously representing the people of Windmill Hill. So the Windmill Pub has been part of the local community in Windmill Hill for many, many years, as you have heard. It has a 5-star rating on TripAdvisor with over 1,000 Facebook followers. It is situated in the prime position of Windmill Hill, and it should be considered as a really viable pub for the area. The local community, the local community, and also the proposed Bedminster Green development, which is going to be happening in the next few years. The planning officers have made a judgment, and they've considered the viability of the pub, which I agree is not correct. Which I agree is not correct. Many of the pubs that the officers have described are not viable pubs for people within Windmill Hill. They are outside the 800 metres of which the Windmill Hill residents need to walk to within 10 minutes. Within that, they have to walk through, for example, Victoria Park, which the local community police officers have already stated they would not recommend people who are vulnerable to walk through that park at night. The demographics of Windmill Hill are between 25 and 45 years of age. They like and would like a local pub that will suit their needs. It is common knowledge that the residents love this pub. They have clearly shown in their attempts to raise money to buy the pub that they value the pub immensely.
I'm really sorry, Councillor Stone. I need to ask you to stop because we've run out of time. I know.
Oh, that was unfortunate.
Okay,
thanks.
Well, thank you very much.
Sorry, bye.
So I've got to... So if we don't keep to time, we'll still be here at 10 o'clock. So next I have Chris Gibson, please. It was on. I think it might be about the speaker position, Tom? Yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. And, great. And the committee, you can hear? Can you confirm that you can hear? Yeah, because that's the most important bit. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, Chris Gibson, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In my statement, I referred to evidence from Nick James, an accountant and successful pub operator who has studied the full trading accounts. He is uniquely qualified to comment and is in no doubt the Windmill is viable. I also commented on the lack of safe walking routes after dark, which Dr. Charlotte Cameron Beaumont, in her objection of 16th November, very clearly and precisely demonstrates. The Equalities Act of 2010 has still not been adequately addressed. Many of those whose interests it's intended to safeguard will find the pubs listed by the case officer simply beyond their reach. Walking distances, especially involving steep hills, should not be calculated solely on the upper limits that favour the able-bodied. We agree with the Civic Society that the loss of the Windmill Hill will diminish the social infrastructure of this neighbourhood. Bristol's planning policies are not about diminishing neighbourhoods. They're about protecting and enhancing them. CAMRA urges you to support the Windmill Hill community and refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, do we have Imogen Taylor?
I oppose the change of use of the Windmill pub. In the planning officer's report, the tap and barrel is presented as a viable alternative for local residents. In fact, it's nearly 1.5 kilometres from the hill, a 17-minute walk via 9 streets, which is outside the applicant's and the planning officer's own definition of locality. Recently, I saw a police van and an ambulance outside the tap and barrel and a man being removed on a stretcher. There was an attempted murder there in 2017 and an assault in 2020. Reviews on Google describe it as a good place to get a pint and your head stoved in. To portray it as a realistic alternative to the community-focused Windmill is nonsense. As a local GP, I'm seeing an epidemic of loneliness, depression, and anxiety, and people need somewhere to relax, build friendships, and develop a sense of belonging. Retaining the Windmill as a lively social hub is important for the well-being of those living on the hill.
Thank you very much. Roland Oliver.
Thank you. The Windmill is a public house. To own a public house is to enter into a kind of stewardship with the local community, visitors, and the generations to come. The current owners bought into this idea. They are on record as wanting to create a place that was child-friendly, but still fitted the principles of the original principles of the British pub. They ran the Windmill successfully for 10 years, less successfully for 2. That self-inflicted downturn is not a justification for the permanent closure of a public house. If you approve this application, you will be sending a message to other pub owners that it might be rather a good idea to run down their business, because then you will reward them for that action by allowing them to sell off their public facility for private development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tessa Fitzjohn, please. Oh, don't forget to use the mic. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm here today as a resident of Windmill Hill and also as councillor for Bedminster, as I consider this application to be of citywide concern and, if passed, will affect planning decisions across the UK. I consider there are 2 issues. One is selling off a public asset, similar to a corner shop, cinema, or similar, as they are worth more as sites for housing development than a public facility. I ask you to imagine our cities, towns and villages without corner shops, theatres or cinemas, buildings that provide opportunities for keeping communities alive, addressing loneliness and well-being and employment. A good pub is far more than a place to drink alcohol, and once lost will never come back. I also question the owner's view that the windmill, became financially unviable. I was a founder member of the Save the Windmill group, and we tried to raise 500,000 to buy the windmill and turn it into a community pub in 2019 to 20. We started by checking out the viability and decided we could make a reasonable profit. That was also agreed by many residents who bought into our share offer and raised 197,000. The Triodos Bank also offered us 150,000 for a mortgage, and the Plunkett Foundation a grant of 100,000. We failed to raise the full 500k that the owner was not prepared to lower his price. We discussed the possibility of offering 400, but it was not acceptable. So I dispute the owner's argument that the windmill isn't viable as incorrect.
I'm so sorry.
That's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have Hazel Collier here, please?
For 4 generations of our family, the uniqueness of the windmill.
Can you... Yeah, if you hold it closer.
Okay. Right, for 4
That's
generations of our family, the uniqueness of the windmill was the family room, where we could enjoy family get-togethers, good beer, simple food, in a separate space away from the bar. No other pub in the area offers the same. They are either dining pubs, sports pubs or alcohol watering holes, suiting the clientele that use them. And apart from the rising sun, all are too far to walk to, and through through areas that no one would choose to walk through after dusk. We noticed the changes in the Windmill a year or so before it closed. Fewer beer choices, no food menu, broken toys, ripped books. The place felt neglected and cared for, so it's no surprise if the profits were down. Bedminster Green will soon have hundreds of new flats, so let the Windmill have a new lease of life for us and all the new residents to enjoy.
Thank you very much. Steve Hawes, please.
Yeah, I apologise if we're now possibly going to get into some repetition of statements. Can't really help that because all the points are common. When we moved to Windmill Hill in 2012, we were delighted to have a local pub which was so welcoming and provided local residents with so many activities. It's very family-friendly and popular with our neighbours. And if the pub did become unprofitable in the run-up to its closure in 2020, we think that would reflect it being less actively managed. For example, the food services were stopped and there was less choice and quality of ales. Now we have an experienced pub operator who wants to buy the pub and run it as a viable business. And given that there are planning applications in currently for building hundreds of flats and student residencies around the nearby Bedminster Green, that would provide many new potential customers for the Windmill. There is only one currently operational pub within the locality of Windmill Hill, and that is the Rising Sun, which doesn't have enough space for the number of customers and range of events that the Windmill hosted. We need the Windmill to become again a community pub where we can meet and get to know our neighbours and share neighbourhood friendship and solidarity. The remaining pubs in the meeting paper are further afield and not likely to be populated by our neighbours. The times and distances to other pubs, as quoted in the meeting paper, do not take into account the need to use safe routes to exit the hill, and that routes are seldom as the crow flies. Good practice is to use routes along streets with houses and cars and suitably lit after dark, and avoid spaces which should not overlook dark alleyways, subways and parks. We are aware of crime in Victoria Park, including pedestrians being held up, robbed or attacked, and East Street is also of concern to the police currently due to accelerated antisocial behaviour.
Thank you. Sorry, the minute goes really fast, so I appreciate that. Nick James, please.
In his report to committee in November 2020, the planning officer stated that the applicant provided detailed profit and loss analysis which demonstrates a significant loss over the last few years. That is a factually incorrect statement. The officer had available to him the accounts for the 3 years ended November 2019, which clearly show a profit. Not only that, there is expenditure of possibly approaching 100,000 in the accounts, which would not apply to normal trading activities. In addition, the owner of the pub did not work in the pub but pay wages which a working owner or tenant would not incur. In his latest report, the planning officer disingenuously alludes to accounts for the year ended November 2020 showing a loss. Of course they show a loss. The pub was closed for most of that period, but still incurred fixed costs. As a chartered accountant and owner of 3 pubs, I can tell you with 100% certainty the Windmill is financially viable. The owner of the pub purchased the pub as a pub. I've made an offer in excess of an independent valuation, and yet the owner has refused to accept that offer. In his latest report, the planning officer refers to a document indicating acceptable walking times of 800 metres, but fails to mention that same document also says that acceptable walking distance could be much lower depending on the quality of the walking experience. In my opinion, councillors have been misled with some of the information provided by the planning officer, and I believe the reports lack a certain amount of credibility.
Thank you very much. Lisa McKeever?
I'm just going to say it from the heart, I just really object to the Windmill being turned into a handful of little flats when we've got so many being built soon. I've lived all over the world in different countries and cities, and actually I was so homesick, I moved back to Bristol. I was so homesick for Windmill Hill and I was missing the pub. And I've come back to the pub and then it closed. It's a unique place. It's somewhere me and my husband could go and you would be guaranteed that you would just speak to someone new, a friendly face, maybe a face that you might have seen, and you would chat to them and then you would see them again. I've never experienced that anywhere else across the world in any other pub. I do think that as soon as it reopens, it will be just the same. And it would be a travesty, and I think we'd feel betrayed as a community in Windmill Hill if the pub didn't reopen again for us and for all the new people who are moving just right on its doorstep. It's in a great location. I wouldn't dream of walking to any of the other pubs apart from the Rising Sun because it's not safe. So I really hope that you make this decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. James Russell, please.
Thank you. I'm going to echo what some other people have said. I believe the planning officer was wrong to assert that there are a dozen other pubs in the locality. One of those on their list is the Black Cat, which some of you may know is on West Street. It's a kilometre from Brendan Road, which is in the heart of Windmill Hill, but it isn't only the distance that is the problem. As anyone who knows our local area will understand, to go from Windmill Hill to West Street means leaving residential streets and walking along roads where there are no houses, only industrial or commercial businesses that are closed at night. I myself don't feel comfortable walking along Malago Road or Sheen Road at night, and I'm sure there are many on Windmill Hill who feel the same. This is one of the many reasons why the Windmill Hill is and should continue to be a thriving and successful community pub. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have Nick Townsend, please?
Thank you. Just 2 points. Firstly, the importance of the local, which needs to be stressed because the planning officer just sees it as a place to drink. And as we've heard here from the fantastic turnout, it's about connection, it's about attachment, it's about belonging. There have been 300 statements about that, and yet still the planning officer doesn't get it. When one of these assets go, then others go after, you know, the shop or community centre. So that's one point. The other point is about safety. I looked at the White Hart. The White Hart's is a sports pub, over 800 metres away. It's accessed through, the safest route is Hereford Street. I included a photograph. Please look at that and tell me if you think that's safe walking down that. That's the scenic part of the route. Then you go on to Dalby Avenue. And then if you survive that, you get into Bedminster Parade, which is a high crime spot. So that's why in 25 years of living on the hill, I've never heard anyone mention the White Hart as a place to go to. So ask yourself, is that safe? Actually, there is no safe route off Windmill Hill. I walk every night around there. It's a male privilege, I suppose. There's no one around there. It's like there's a curfew there. So we need that pub, and it's got even quieter since the Windmill closed. So the Windmill is absolutely crucial to the area.
Thank you very much. We forgot to turn on the lights, but thanks. Fiona Stainer, please.
Like others, I feel safety has not been considered by the planning officer in his report. The distances he lists to alternative pubs require routes through unlit alleys and high crime areas. For example, he lists the Brunel on St. John's Lane as 482 metres and an 8-minute walk from the Windmill pub. The only way that's possible is via an unlit alleyway between the backs of houses down which I would not feel safe walking after dark. Aside from this, the Brunel provides an entirely different function to the Windmill. It's a sports bar, doesn't have the family focus, and I would argue does not serve our community given its location off the hill. My wife and I have heard so much from our friends in the neighbourhood about the direct benefits the Windmill pub provided our community. What's particularly striking to us is the number of women who say they felt safe heading to the Windmill on their own. As members of the LGBTQ+ community, my wife and I must consider personal safety more than a heterosexual person when visiting spaces like pubs. With homophobia still prevalent in the UK, there are many spaces we would consider unsafe or even hostile to visit, which is why the presence of a local community pub where we are known and where we can rely on friends being present is particularly important to us. Thank you.
Tom Phillips Bryanoff, please.
Hello. The
Windmill for me is an essential part of our village inner city. Support is clear in last year's crowdfunding, raising 170k, despite the pandemic and financial uncertainty. It should and could be saved with a little council backing. The local views are ignored and the civic connection is drained. The pub has managed for 150 years and investors and the bank were willing to back the buyouts. The report lists alternative pubs and facilities. This approach is spurious, giving no insight into the real effects. By this standard, any pub could be closed, as there is almost bound to be a pub, or skate park even, within a kilometre. It makes a nonsense of the process. The majority of suggested alternatives are either not on the hill, or are old school men's boozers or sports bars. The Windmill is unique. There is nowhere else locally with the same community-embedded, family and welcoming vibe. The majority of the old clientele will never go to those alternatives. Please use your foresight and allow the pub to flourish.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ed Plowden, please.
Hello. Thank you, Chair. I normally sit on the other development committee, so I'm going to be focusing on two bits of the officer's report. One is the viability assessment. We've heard a lot of things about that, but essentially we are relying in the officer's report on a chartered accountant employed by the publican for the viability assessment, really just saying that this is a legal thing that he's done, including taking very substantial dividends from the pub. We are also going to hear in future development committees about several, seeing in train already approved 2,500 households within 500 metres of this on Bedminster Green. I would argue that that would improve the viability of pub. I also think it's slightly strange that another committee will hear that an application which is in train 300 feet from this pub will have to have community facilities put into that new development, and we're losing much loved and existing community facilities. There's a bit of a push me pull you going on here, and I think it's a bit unfortunate. The other thing I'd like to say is that the baseline for the calculations of the distances, we've heard a lot about the unsuitability of the pubs, the unsuitability of the routes, but the baseline is wrong, because it's from the front of the pub, not from the epicentre of where the community is and where all the comments have come from. If you move the epicentre to the middle of the Windmill Hill community, it adds 180 metres to all the distances, and there are no pubs in Filwood to the south. 0 pubs in the entire ward. So I think we need to look at the officer's report with very carefulness, and I think we also need to remember there will be a lot of other similar applications coming for pubs coming, and we want to set a good precedent here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dania Stevens, please.
The Windmill pub is at the heart of our community. In spite of what's been asserted, Windmill Hill, my home for 17 years, has a dearth of pubs within safe walking distance for all residents of the community. One of the pubs listed as an alternative local pub is the London Inn on Cannon Street. This is not a local pub. First of all, it is farther than the 800 metres. It is 1 kilometre from Dunkerry Road, the heart of Windmill Hill. Significantly, as a woman walking alone by the most direct route, I wouldn't feel safe walking down the dark path, through an empty park, then under a railway bridge, past a deserted industrial estate, to reach the pub, which is located in an area that doesn't feel safe at night, at the top of East Street. One of the vital attributes of the Windmill pub was that for so many residents, especially vulnerable, the pub is located a short, safe, and convenient walk from our homes, and we can get there without fear or danger in our own neighborhood. Please save our local pub, a place of community and friendship.
Thank you. Sarah Hallway, please.
Hi there. I'm going to wing it slightly based on what everyone said. The Windmill, I've lived on Windmill Hill for 20 years and we go to the pub every week. It's a space we go together to stave off isolation and loneliness. One of the main things for me there was film club, which we ran in the back room. Every other week I would go and meet my friends and neighbours. I'd meet new friends. We'd bring new neighbours along. There's no space for us to do that anywhere else on the hill, certainly not in the Rising Sun, which is too small. I'd take my family there for meals, to meet friends. I'd put my head in and passing on my way home to see which of my neighbours I could join for a chat. When one of our neighbours died, it's there that we congregated after his funeral, and there that we keep mementos of that person as part of our community. There are no suitable alternatives in terms of space and location. The steam crane is listed as one, with the planning officer saying it's 7 minutes away. This is an 18-minute walk from my house, 1,200 metres. I can cut that short by 2 more minutes if I go through or adjacent to a completely dark churchyard, but I'm choosing not to do that. We've already lost one pub called the Fox to flats. We have a buyer at the current market value. I'm asking that you turn down this planning application and ensure that what was bought at market value for a pub is also sold at market value pub, not for a higher development rate. Please protect our valuable community asset.
Thank you very much. And do we have Mike Cranny?
Thank you. Hello. I'll keep this brief, as I'm aware the committee have had to digest a lot of material. I would hope that members can look beyond the very basic narrative of a greedy landlord cashes in while depriving the community, as there are a very different set of circumstances behind this story, and indeed every pub closure in the city. I would urge the committee to consider the situation with our other pub, a well-supported community pub, facing a very similar fate, without finance to continue to service the added debt forced by the pandemic. That's all.
Thank you very much. We're going to move, I think that's the last of our public forum statements for this. Is there anybody here who submitted a statement who was intending to speak but hasn't been called? No, good. Okay, so we're going to move to the officer presentation. Just for sake of clarity, all of the committee have the slides on their laptops because it gives us a better viewability than looking at there. So if you don't see us looking at that, it's because we're looking at our laptops. Okay, over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So before us, we have planning application 20/02864. Site address is the Windmill pub, which sits at 14 Windmill Hill and the adjoining dwelling, 3 Eldon Terrace. The proposal is the first floor and raised single-storey rear extensions, the change of use of the pub and conversion into 5 flats, the reinstatement of the basement beneath 3 Eldon Terrace into residential use, which is retrospective, the minor external alterations and subdivision of the rear garden area. The officer recommendation is to approve subject to conditions. So as you'll see from the red line plan, the pub sits at the corner junction of Windmill Hill and 3 Eldon Terrace. Slightly wider site context, the red star is the pub. It sits just to the south of the train line and Bedminster Station. To the northwest is Malago Road, to the east is Victoria Park, and to the south is St John's Lane. So this is the street scene. The pub is the building in purple. The light green building next to it is 3 Eldon Terrace. Currently, the downstairs is in the public house use, and above this there is a 4-bed flat. The 3 Eldon Terrace, the beer cellar for the pub was previously below this dwelling, but this has since been sold and the beer cellar has been converted back into residential, so the pub does not currently have a functioning beer cellar. This is the street scene along Eldon Terrace. You'll see that the public house shares similar design characteristics to the other dwellings in that it's got a step-down, flat parapet roof. The windows and door openings are also similar. There will be some minor external alterations to this elevation in that some of the windows will be slightly enlarged and there'll be a new door for the Unit 2 as proposed. This is the Windmill Hill elevation. You'll see the garden terrace, which is a beer garden, and behind this there is a single-storey side extension. The proposal sees the removal of this and the erection of a first-floor flat roof side extension. So a quick recap of the proposal. It's the change of use into 5 flats, the reinstatement of the basement between 3 Eldon Terrace, which is retrospective, the first-floor side extension to replace the existing lean-to, some minor external alterations, a single-storey rear extension, the subdivision of the rear garden, and waste and recycling and cycle storage. So these are the proposed elevations. The top left drawing shows the Windmill Hill elevation. You'll see the flat roof side extension. Below this is the rear extension, the rear elevation of that side extension, and you'll see there is a privacy screen across some of the windows to prevent any overlooking into the neighbouring gardens. To the right of this in the middle is the Eldon Terrace elevation. You'll see the new window and door openings. And then to the rear, there is a very small single-storey rear extension. All these external alterations are considered to be small scale and not to have any harmful impact on the architectural integrity or character of the public house. These are the internal layouts. All the flats are considered to provide adequate living conditions for any future occupants and are not considered to result in any unacceptable impact on neighbour amenity. The public consultation in relation into this round of the application saw 169 objections for the following matters. The pub should be retained as a community facility. The community group and buyer interest demonstrates that the pub remains viable. The proposed flats will create additional congestion because of on-street parking. Alternative provision of public houses in the area does not consider safe walking routes, and the profit and loss information submitted by the applicant is considered to be misleading. So a quick recap of the planning history. The application was approved at Planning Committee B back in November 2020. 5 voted for it, 3 against it, and there was 1 abstention. The decision was subsequently challenged and quashed based on the 3 grounds below, which was that the council had failed to consider or discharge its duty under the Equalities Act, that the council had failed to properly apply policy DM5, and by failing to consider the asset of community value status of the site, and also by failing to properly assess the existing shortfalls in community provision. And then the final ground was that the council had failed to apply policy DM6 according to its express terms. So I'll deal with policy DM6 first because it is the primary policy in relation to the change of use of public houses. So the policy states that proposals involving the loss of established public houses will not be permitted unless it is demonstrated that the public house is either no longer economically viable or that a diverse range of public houses doesn't exist locally. Now, you'll notice that there's 2 criteria to this policy, and then there's this word or, which I've underlined and highlighted in red to demonstrate its importance. This means that both criterion don't have to be satisfied. It's only one or the other. So if I deal with the first criterion first, the financial information that was submitted with the application has been provided by Richardson Swift Chartered Accountants. The profit and loss details show a loss of £13,000, approximately £13,000 for the year ending November 2019, and a loss of £7,000 for the year ending November 2020. Now, this financial information is accepted in good faith. It's been supplied by a professional accountant who have a responsibility to provide fair and accurate accounts in relation to their client's business. Further to this, the Windmill has been marketed by Fleurettes from January 2019, and Fleurettes are a leading commercial lettings and sales agency with extensive knowledge of the Bristol market. They valued it at £495,000. There was a full asking price offer received by a leading pub group. However, the offer was rejected by the applicant because, firstly, it contained some unfavourable sales conditions, but primarily because the applicant wanted to allow the community group additional time to raise the funds needed to buy the pub off him. After a prolonged period of discussions between the applicant and the community groups, they were unfortunately unable to raise the necessary funds to purchase the pub, as they only managed to raise £170,000. The applicant did offer a leasehold arrangement to the community group, but no interest was shown in this. Now, the community group also had the pub independently valued at £315,000, and an offer of £350,000 was put forward by another interested party, but was rejected by the applicant because obviously it's considerably below the £495,000 asking price. To date, there's been no further offers. So, moving to the second criterion of policy DM6. DM6 does not specifically state what distance can be considered as local, but the supporting text states that it should be within a reasonable walking distance. Now, it would be really useful if the policy provided a definition of locality or what exact walking distance would be considered acceptable, but sadly it doesn't. So for illustrative purposes, officers have consulted the Transport for Manual for Streets, which states that walkable neighbourhoods are typically characterised by having a range of facilities within 10 minutes walk or up to about 800 metres. Various objectors have commentated that this 800 metre distance should not be considered as the crow flies when seen on a map, but needs to be along direct, accessible and safe walking routes, as referenced by another guidance document provided by the IHT. However, it's to be noted that adherence to either of these documents is not a policy requirement of DM6. It only has to be a reasonable walking distance. That's all the explanation the policy requires. So, within an approximate walking radius of 800 metres, there are 14 other public houses. It's to be noted that these walking distances are based on Google Maps and have been converted from miles into metres. So, for example, 0.3 miles is approximately 482 metres. So when seen collectively, these 14 public houses are considered to provide a diverse range of establishments as detailed in the supporting text of DM6. Now, objectors have commented that the change of use of the windmill would result in various people having to walk late at night along undesirable and potentially unsafe walking routes in order to access this other public house provision. Now, I fully understand the concerns of locals in this respect, but the safety of citizens on the streets of Bristol is primarily a policing matter. It's not a planning consideration. Avon and Somerset Police have been consulted as part of this application, and the crime prevention officer has raised no objection and has commented that the proposal site is within a relatively low crime area, and admittedly this is only 150 metres around the Windmill pub as existing. So to summarise, because officers feel that there is a diverse range of public house provision in the locality, 14 other pubs within 800 metres, it means that the first criterion is not required. However, the applicant, even though this is not a policy requirement, has provided additional financial information to help justify the change of use. Moving to policy DM5, which relates specifically to the loss of community facilities. Now again, you'll notice this word or, which again I've highlighted in red and underlined. Criterion 1 and 4 are considered to be the most applicable to this application, and it's considered that both are fully satisfied. So moving to criterion 1, the loss of the existing community use is considered not to create a shortfall of provision of such uses in the locality because there are 14 other pubs in the locality, the closest one being less than 150 metres away from the proposal site. Moving to criterion 4, it is also considered that there are appropriate replacement community facilities provided in an alternative location. So the map before you is taken from our Pinpoint Plus mapping system, which is what officers use to assess all planning applications. The premises highlighted in yellow are designated community facilities. In addition to these, there are numerous other sports clubs in the locality. I know this has caused some humour amongst the objectors when I've referenced the skate park, and I understand that fully, but in terms of DM5, sports facilities are considered to be community facilities, and so when seen collectively, in addition to the 14 other pubs, it's considered that there are a range of community facilities within the locality. Moving to the Equalities Act, Section 149 of the Act sets out the public sector equalities duty. This requires the LPA to consider the potential impact of development upon those with any protected characteristics. It's to be noted that the Windmill pub does not cater specifically for any group with protected characteristics and does not contain any specialised disabled facilities or access routes. As mentioned, it's considered that there is a diverse range of other pubs and community facilities in the locality, and these are considered to provide a genuine alternative for all groups who share protected characteristics. The pub is designated as an asset of community value. The building was added to the ACV register on the 8th of September 2021. The owner's intention to sell required a 6-week moratorium period between January and February 21. The community group submitted intention to bid. So this meant that another 6-month moratorium period was required, and this expired in July 2021. No bid was put forward by any community group. This means that the pub can now be sold on the open market and any change of use can be permitted. Other considerations: there's been no objection raised by transport officers regarding the lack of any off-street parking. The bin and cycle storage provision is considered acceptable. There's been no objection from city design officers, as it's considered that there's no harm to the street scene or the identity or architectural character of the pub. All of the flats are considered to be an acceptable size and provide adequate outlook and daylight, providing appropriate living conditions for all future occupants. And it's also considered that there's no unacceptable impact on neighbour amenity. Currently, the council is unable to demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing. In these circumstances, the presumption in favour of sustainable development, as set out in paragraph 11D of the NPPF, is engaged. The benefit of the proposal would be the small but valuable contribution to the area's housing stock. As relevant plan policies are satisfied, it's considered that there are no adverse impacts that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of increasing local housing supply when assessed against the policies in the NPPF as a whole. So the officer recommendation is that the application is approved, subject to conditions requiring a construction management plan, the implementation of refuge storage and recycling facilities, the completion of the pedestrian and cycling access, completion of maintenance of cycling provision, accordance with the sustainability statement, and the retention of the privacy visibility screen on the rear elevation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we get into questions, can I just get you to clarify a couple of things for me? The first one is about the basement, which used to be their beer cellar, that they now don't have because it's being returned to the previous building. Can you tell us more about how that has become possible without planning permission or without this being passed?
Absolutely. Admittedly, this is quite an unusual arrangement. I think it's because the pub was previously a dwelling and so isn't set out like most normal pubs would be. I understand that the adjoining dwelling, 3 Eldon Terrace, was owned by Mike Craney and a business partner, and that the basement was used as the beer cellar but was leased back to the pub, being Bar Wars. Now, there was never any planning permission granted for this use of the basement as a beer cellar, but in 2019 there was a certificate of lawfulness granted, meaning that the council would not be able to take any enforcement action against this use as a beer cellar. But this did not prohibit it returning back into residential use because there was never any planning permission granted, so planning permission wasn't needed to turn it back into a beer cellar.
Okay, and just to clarify, the removal of that basement is one of the reasons being argued for the pub being less viable?
I haven't seen that, no.
No.
I haven't seen that in the argument, no.
Okay, so the fact that there's no beer cellar is irrelevant to the viability or the application?
It hasn't been considered as part of the viability in my assessment, no.
Good, okay, great. And then the second question was around the equalities assessment, because I know that's the reason why this is coming back to committee. Can you explain how the equalities assessment was carried out? Bearing in mind, you have noted that there's no disabled facilities. However, not all disabilities are visible. And even though accessible toilet facilities is preferable, it's not the only thing to be taken into consideration.
I'd like to defer to our solicitor on this matter, if that's possible.
Thank you very much. Hello, solicitor. If you could introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair. My name is Roy Pinney, and I am planning lawyer with the City Council. And I was invited to this meeting specifically for this purpose, to advise on what is in some ways a peculiar case, because you are considering an application where a planning permission has already been quashed and it's been remitted to the council as local planning authority for a second decision. And your officer has already referred to those legal proceedings, which were by way of judicial review and which were resolved by consent, and he identified the grounds of the original judicial review proceedings. The first of those alleged that the council, in its decision in November 20, had failed to give regard to the equalities duty under relevant legislation. Now, the first point I'd like to make is that judicial review is not directed at the council's planning decision in terms of its evaluation and weighing of planning merits. Judicial review is directed at the decision-making process employed by the council, and essentially what the council is required to do under the equalities legislation is to have regard to the need to identify the goals identified in section 149 subsection 1 of the 2010 Act. So what happens, the reason for that is that the parliamentary intention is that there should be greater awareness of the existence and legal consequences of equalities issues, but within that sense it is for the decision maker, in this case this committee, to determine how much weight to give to those issues. Now, the judicial review alleged successfully that this committee at the time had failed to give due regard to the equalities issue. Hence, that decision has been remitted for you now. Your officer report now includes a specific section on equalities, but I stress again, that is a factor that you're having due regard to as an automatic part of your decision-making process, as effectively you are in any application that comes before you. So the issues which are relevant as material planning considerations to your decision are those that your officer has already referred to in his presentation and in his officer report.
Thank you very much. Are you wanting to add something to that, Gary? Or no? Okay, good, great. So, questions. I can see Tony and I go Tony, then Andrew, then Fabian. Amira, did you have one? And then Amira, and then Leslie, and also Guy.
Thank you, Chair. I want to query the interpretation of the word diverse in DM6, because diversity is not just a question of numbers. If I use an analogy, we would not be refusing permission for a bookstore as a retail provision because there are 12 Tesco's in the area. I think the point I'm getting at is that not all pubs are the same. I'm a Southfield Ward councillor and I live in Ashton Gate, and I know many of the pubs that are listed, and they do serve very different clienteles. So the interpretation of DM6, where the word diverse seems to be used as a synonym for quantity, is one of concern for me.
Was that a question?
My question was, how are we interpreting the word diverse in DM6?
Okay, thank you.
Well, firstly, we're assessing the public houses on what they are in terms of their planning use. And so when I say there's 14 other public houses, there's 14 other public houses, as in they're in a sui generis use as a pub. Now, the supporting text of DM6, I'll read it because I don't know it off by heart. The applicant will need to provide evidence of a range of pubs in the locality that can collectively continue to meet the needs and expectations of the whole community. This will include a good choice of pub environments, offering a diverse range of services and community and leisure activities. As a guide, the locality should include all other surrounding public houses within a reasonable walking distance. Another part of the supporting text says that pubs provide opportunities for social interaction and in many cases provide or facilitate particular community activities. This might include space for sports and social clubs, children's play areas, evening classes or community meetings. It might also include social activities such as skittles, quiz nights, live music and entertainment, or other events. Now, admittedly, I have not been to every single one of these 14 pubs, but as I said in my report and in my presentation, collectively, they're considered to satisfy these because there is a variety of pubs, as mentioned by objectors. Some of them are sports pubs, some of them are food pubs, some of them are wet pubs, some of them are old man pubs, some of them are more family-friendly pubs. So when seen collectively, it's considered that there's a diverse range.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Okay, at the beginning, especially Councillor Stone. I have asked, and I must repeat now, this is not a point that any of the public gallery can speak and getting involved in. We're here to observe the process and the conversations that we have and how we make the decision, but you can't unfortunately join in. And I do understand that's really frustrating, but it is definitely in your benefit to not try to join in and heckle as best as you can. If it does get too much, I will have to ask people to leave, and I don't want to have to do that, okay? So if I can ask you to bear with us with this, please, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Chair. I've got nothing else to say, if I'm honest. I've tried to explain in my report and the presentation that collectively the 14 other pubs are considered to provide a diverse range because there is a variety of different types of pub.
Okay, thank you. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I've got lots of questions, but two from what's been discussed so far. One is coming back to your questions about the cellar, the situation on the cellar, because it was in use as a cellar. It's now no longer in use as a cellar. What I'm confused about is that in the relevant history section of the papers, there is mention of an application in 1981 to change the use of that cellar. It says, change of use of cellar only of dwelling house to storage area in relation to public house and internal improvements to the public house. So that suggests that there was an application in 1981 specifically to designate that cellar under number 3 Eldon Terrace as a cellar for the pub. So what I'm slightly confused about is you say that the certificate of lawful use doesn't require planning permission to be rescinded, but A, there appears to have been a planning consent in the first place, and B, we're actually being asked as part of this application to grant retrospective permission for that no longer to be used as a cellar. So I'm not clear on the exact legal situation with regards to the cellar. And then the second question was in relation to what you said about the property. You said Fleuret's had valued it at 495,000, and I want to be clear whether they had valued it at that or whether they had marketed it at that.
Okay, moving to the planning history, you are right. In 1981, there was the permission for the change of use of the cellar only of the dwelling house, the storage area. However, because there was a certificate of lawfulness application submitted in 2019, I presume, I don't know off the top of my head is the short answer, I presume that there may never have been evidence that that application was ever implemented. So I presume the 2019 certificate of lawfulness application was to rectify the situation because it was unclear if there was ever any planning permission granted for the cellar. I haven't got those applications in front of me, I'm afraid, so I can't say any more than that. In terms of the Fleuret, it was marketed at 495,000, but I presume that's the same as the valuation. I'm not a commercial property expert and I'm not an accountant, so I'm only going on the information that I've been provided. And the marketing I've seen is the pub has been marketed at 495,000. But again, the valuation, I'm not a surveyor, so I can't say that.
Yeah, no, that's not how valuation works, unfortunately. Okay, did you have any follow-up questions to that, Andrew?
No, I appreciate you've obviously not got the whole history, there, but I think it is disappointing that we don't know that because as a council we must have the records of what happened to that application, whether it was granted, whether it was implemented, whatever.
Yeah, please do, Gary.
Yes, Chair, just to clarify, we will have records of every application that's made and what the decision was. We won't necessarily have records of implementation. These days we get more of that information because there are formal discharge of condition applications, so for developments that have been given permission, say, over the last 5 years, even if you kind of never went past the site, you'll get a good idea that something's been implemented if there's a whole series of applications to discharge conditions, because developers won't just do that for the fun of it. Back in 1981, the whole process of discharging conditions, there were much less conditions, and the whole process of discharging them wasn't very open and transparent and wasn't a formal process. So we won't necessarily know whether various permissions were implemented or uses commenced.
Okay, thank you. And also just to follow up on the thing about valuation, the commercial property is quite often marketed at about 10 to 20% higher than the valuation, especially for rentals, but so that's something to bear in mind. I think Fabian, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 questions. First of all, when you took the photos of the application site, did you actually have a walk around and see for yourself what the routes to these different pubs were actually going to be like? Or was it just a desk exercise?
I walked to the Rising Sun, and I've been to the Victoria Park as a customer, so I know the area in that respect. But no, I didn't walk to all 14 pubs. But I have been to Bedminster and I've walked along Malago Road. So even though there wasn't part of my formal assessment, I do have a reasonable understanding of the area.
Okay. How many houses or how many homes are being built in Bedminster Green, and when do we expect them to be built?
That's one for me, Chair, really. So Bedminster Green, there are 5 plots. 3 of them have received resolutions to grant permission, so there's 2 kind of still outstanding. One of the sites is for student accommodation, around 750, something like that. The other applications, again, I'm struggling to know precise numbers. It's been a little while since they came to committee. But it'll be, I mean, overall, in terms of the future development, it's how you class the student development. It's about 1,000, 1,500 of that order. So it is a significant amount. Of course, all the other side of the railway from the Windmill pub, and there's been lots of comments about how, usable that route is, which I think I'm duty bound to kind of reference as well. So I'm sorry I can't give you a firm figure, but it's that number at the moment with a couple of sites. One is in as an application at the moment, of course, and the other one, plot 1, which is a former A2 Dominion site, that's still to come forward with a new application. But hopefully I've given you a good impression of the type of quantum.
Can you
so 1,500
hold
already?
on, can you just repeat, just for clarity, the exact number that you just said, because it got lost slightly in the talking?
Yeah, well, Chair, that's why I didn't give a precise number as a guesstimate, really. So it's in the order of 1,500, I would say, depending on how you classify the student accommodation.
And that's units as opposed to people, obviously. So it could be a student accommodation of, say, 8 flat sort of rooms within a flat, or it could be a 3-bedroomed unit.
The student number was actual rooms, individual rooms around cluster flats. So it'll be no more than that number in terms of people. And in terms of residential, it's at the moment, it's about sort of between 300 and 400, something like that. So, yeah, sorry for being so vague.
Just to be clear, that's for the sites that have already got permission. The other 2 sites would add to that. Okay, thank you.
Amira.
Thanks, Chair. My question, someone else asked it, so it's been answered.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Leslie and then Guy.
Thank you. It appears to me that we seem to be having to take a lot of the financial information on trust. There was a department of the council where we used to refer applications because they could assess the viability of something, and it was used a lot when people were trying to get out of their obligations to provide a certain percentage of affordable housing. So has this application been referred to them, or have you just accepted that it might be trustworthy?
Chair, I can answer that one. So I think Councillor Alexander's referring to when we have viability appraisals relating to affordable housing. And so they're all usually wider development appraisals about how the value of land costs for building development and the value of the units that come forward, what the profit margins are, and therefore what a reasonable proportion of affordable housing is. And it's quite often the case that a developer would say can't afford any or very little. We don't have that expertise in-house, but we have been consistently commissioning that out to our own experts in that field, and so that's how a lot of affordable housing negotiation has happened over the years. It's less of that now because of the affordable housing practice note setting a benchmark of 20%. This is quite different. This is a viability of an individual business, so we don't have the expertise in-house or sort of access to that particular expertise outside either. And the view that we came to was that the finances were put together by a professional chartered accountant. They've got their own professional code of conduct to work to. So on that basis, we have accepted it. But clearly, as members, you can take your own view on that.
I wanted to ask some questions about viability, so I'm just going to jump in. So taking it as a factual report, which of course we are, it's disappointing that it's only one page. It's not a very detailed one. I have questions about it. I see that they used to sell food, and then at some point they seem to have stopped selling food. So one of the public statements that came in has a much more in-depth or sort of a longer period of previous years, and it indicates a large income from food, which then stopped in the year that they become unviable. So my questions are, why did they stop selling food? And the other question is around staffing costs. So there's over £90,000 being spent on staffing. How many staff members is that? And how does the owner actually, are they working there themselves, or are they employing lots of other people to do it, because they seem to get lots of dividends from this, but are they actually in there running the pub? Because that has a bearing on the viability and the turnover. And what was the other question? The other question was, I'll tell you what, you answer those questions and I'll remember what my other question was.
I can't answer either of those questions. I'm sorry. I asked the applicant for all the financial information they could provide, and all that I've been provided with has been shown to you all. But I'll go back to DM6, if I may, that it's not a policy requirement to demonstrate any economic viability if the second criterion is satisfied. And it's my officer's opinion that because of the 14 other pubs, with the closest one being less than 150 metres away, that criterion is satisfied, meaning that the first criterion is not a policy requirement. And so we haven't requested the forensic financial evidence from the applicant.
I feel that was rather presumptive that the committee would agree. I think we would, as a committee, have preferred to have the full information on viability, seeing as that's also something that we're considering today. I think it's very disappointing that we don't have that. The other question that I wanted to ask around was there are other pubs owned by this company which are not material considerations for this application, but are being brought into it as part of the viability, because it appears from the statement that the Windmill has a proportion of the debt from the company to service, even if it's not debt that directly arises from the Windmill itself. And if a different person owned and ran the Windmill, they wouldn't have those same outgoing costs. So they're being brought in as material considerations in regards to the viability of it, but no, not actually directly arising from this pub itself. Is that correct?
I haven't mentioned the other pubs in my report. And
No, but I'm reading in the viability statement that's on the papers.
Again, I haven't given them that much significant weight because it's my officer recommendation to the committee, not their decision, but my recommendation that there is a diverse range of other public houses. And so the financial information required by Criterion 1 hasn't been provided. I did request from the applicant, and I did explain the situation about coming to committee, that they should provide as much financial information as possible, and they provided the information that has been given to you. So that's all I can say on the matter.
Okay. Can you tell me at which point in the financial year that is covered by the viability report, the pub was actually open and trading, and at which points it was closed?
I can, it's in my report, but I think they closed in April or March 2020, because I remember it was just before the lockdown, the national lockdown.
Well, the lockdown was in March, so...
So it must have been March then, sorry. Let me just check my report.
And their financial year runs till November?
Yeah, that's the information I've got. All the information I've got is provided in the report, and it runs till November of each year, 2019 and 2020. So admittedly, the financial year of 2020 is considerably shorter than it should be.
Yeah, so the quantity of the losses incurred by the company also happens in a time of COVID, and therefore isn't really representative of the financial situation for a pub in that location.
Absolutely, I agree with that. But as I say, I haven't, because my assessment is, in my officer's opinion, there is a diverse range of other public houses, and so I haven't given that much weight to the economic information and the financial information, because I'm not qualified to do so. I'm a planning officer, I'm not a chartered accountant, I'm not a publican, I'm not a surveyor. So I've accepted this information in good faith from their own accountant, and I've given it limited weight because I'm not qualified to forensically delve into it.
Okay. All right. All right. Again, please, from the gallery. Thank you very much. Guy, do you have questions?
I do, Chair. Thank you very much. I just wanted to check in policy, and apologies for the continuous focus on viability. We have a situation where the pub's been marketed at £500,000 and no offers have been received at that level. I find it quite difficult then to take that as the valuation. On the other hand, we have an independent valuation saying 315,000 and offers have been received in relation to that rate. So I'm just wondering, is this committee under any obligation to treat one of those figures as more accurate than the other?
There was an offer received at 495 from a pub chain, but it was rejected from the applicant because he wanted to allow the community group, because he thought they were the better option at the time, additional time to raise funds. This is just the information I've been given from the applicant. And so the valuation of pubs, again, I'm not a chartered surveyor. I can't talk about the correct valuation of pubs, but it was marketed at 495 grand and there was an offer put forward at the first.
That brings me to my second question. Unfavourable conditions seems like a very vague and ambiguous thing to refuse an offer of £500,000 for. I'm just wondering what that might be characterised as.
It's my understanding, again, this is all from information from the applicant, so admittedly it would be better if we could ask him, but I understand that they wanted a very quick sale. They wanted to complete in a week or so. This is my understanding of the situation, that they wanted a really quick sale and they hadn't viewed the property, so they wanted him to accept their offer and then they were going to carry out an inspection. And so it's my understanding that the applicant, because of the extensive discussions with the community group, wanted to allow them more time to potentially raise the funds necessary. I've tried to make this out in my report, I think, but the information I have is all contained in that.
Thank you very much. Just a couple more, if that's okay. DM6, I was listening very carefully as you read DM6, and I thought you said it is for the applicant to demonstrate that there's a diversity of pubs in the locality. Is that right?
Well, they provided a map, which we talked about in the first committee meeting, but on top of that, well, firstly, that map, it showed the pubs within 800 metres, but as I said, it was as the crow flies. But because of the level of objection that was received to this and the additional documents referenced, being the manual for streets and the IHT document, I plotted the distances to all the other pubs myself using Google Maps. And so that is admittedly the quickest walking distance. But again, DM6 doesn't specify that we have to use this 800 metre radius. It just specifies locality and reasonable walking distance, but there isn't any clarification as to what that is. And so to address the concerns raised by the many objectors, I use those other documents. And it's noted that the Manual for Streets document is used by our highways officers to consider when they're assessing if applications can be car-free developments, and they're considering would occupants have reasonable services in walking distances, they use that 800 metre. But they, from my experience, they do it as the crow flies. But in this instance, I've considered it based on Google Maps walking distances. And admittedly, some of these are more unfavourable than others, but because DM6 doesn't specifically say what the walking distances have to be or what condition the routes have to be in, I'm tied by the policy in my assessment. So in my mind, the requirements of that second criterion, 14 pubs is acceptable in terms of it providing a diverse range.
No, thank you. You've made that clear. I just wanted to... One of the interesting things about the reason we're seeing this again is the failure of the original committee to pay due regard to their duty under the Equalities Act. And I'm just wondering in that context whether context like LGBTQIA plus people feeling vulnerable on the routes to some of those other pubs could be taken into account, whether the terrain for a disabled person is something that can be taken into account.
Yes, because we've got to, together, in terms of our report to yourselves as a committee, and in terms of your decision making, you've got to successfully discharge the public sector equality duties. You've got to have due regard to those specific impacts on groups of protected characteristics, and there'll be different approaches to that. And so it's just something you have to weigh up in your wider decision making. So as long as you're factoring it in to your decision, then you're discharging that duty. But it's a have regard to issue rather than must do it in a particular way. So as long as you're having regard to it, then whatever decision you make will be clear from that challenge that we had last time.
Thank you. Final question was to do with DM5. It's this idea that I think I'm using the right word for the right chunk of policy. Replacement community facility strikes me as something that might be open to interpretation. Because if the supporting text of DM5 stipulates that community facilities can be wide-ranging so as to suggest that a childcare facility is a replacement for a pub, I'm just wanting to check that my understanding's right there.
Well, the pub in its capacity as a community facility is the fact that it's a pub, it's a place where people can meet and congregate. And so there are other environments where people can meet and congregate. And that's what the wording of the policy tries to set out, that a sports club is a place where people can meet and congregate and do things. A church hall is similar. But then there's these other facilities which I understand that a creche, say, or a daycare centre doesn't provide the same community need as a pub. But again, going back to the diverse range of other pubs, because of all the other pubs in the area, on top of the community facilities, it's considered that DM5 is satisfied.
I just want to be absolutely clear that the word replacement is defined within the terms of the policy. It's not something that's subjective enough for us to go, it's not a replacement.
I come in on this one because policy DM5, if I'm reading it correctly, there's 4 criteria and they're all ors. You don't have to meet all 4, and so the replacement point is criteria 4. So appropriate replacement community facilities are provided in a suitable alternative location. That would have to be passed if the previous 3 aren't met. Number 1, we feel would be met in that the loss of this particular community use would not add to a shortfall in the provision and quality of such uses within the locality. You know, we've talked a lot about the facilities that are there that are both public houses of different types and other community facilities. I mean, there's been comments about skate park, but that's part of that assessment against that policy, unless I've got that wrong. So in our opinion, it meets that first criteria. The rest of the policy, therefore, doesn't need to be tested. So there doesn't have to be a replacement because of the wider provision in the area already.
I'd like to, so just to follow up on what Guy has said. We've been focusing on sort of DM5 a bit as well, but in the statement from the gentleman from Canberra, Chris Gibson, which is number 9, I believe, on our public forum statement, he argues that because DM6 applies solely to pubs, and the Windmill is a pub, that DM5 is redundant. How would you respond to that?
Well, public houses are specified as being community facilities in DM5, and so DM5 also has to be considered, albeit we're considering the pub as a community facility and not as a public house.
But does DM6 top trump DM5?
Well, they're all taken into consideration on balance, but DM6 relates specifically to the change of use of public houses, and that is the application before us today.
Okay, so and just to be clear, if we're satisfied that it doesn't meet either of those DM6 options, that's enough to refuse?
Unless material considerations indicate otherwise, Chair. So both policies are exactly the same status. DM5 does relate to pubs because the second paragraph underneath it talks about other uses whose primary function is commercial but perform a social community role, i.e. sport, recreational, leisure facilities, including local pubs. So if you don't have regard to policy DM5, there's another judicial review, I'm afraid. So it has to have regard to, give weight to it as the adopted local plan policy and DM6. And yeah, if you feel that it doesn't meet either of those policies, yeah, the presumption should be to refuse, but there might be other material considerations, such as housing delivery, that might outweigh that. And that's part of the housing delivery test challenge that we do have now, in that there's this what's called the tilted balance. Because the city does not have a 5-year housing land supply, the presumption is in favour of housing development.
Okay, well, thank you for that clarification. Tony?
My question was answered. I'm ready for debate now.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move to the debate. And so just to clarify, our most important policy considerations are DM6, which is about viability and the range of other options. Fabian?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As the debates were as the officer presentation, the questions and the public forum were all coming together, my thoughts were coming together. On DM6, viability isn't proven either way. We've seen there is conflicting evidence from both sides. On diverse range, what's missing is the issue of how do you get to them. And having seen the photographs that were supplied in the public forum of some of these routes, I'm not convinced that there are enough alternative provisions within safe access for those people in Windmill Hill if we allow this pub to be lost. I'm also aware that I also believe that this would breach the Equalities Act 2010 section 149 because the question of being unsafe would have a particular impact on women and LGBTQ. And a member of the LGBTQ community came and spoke to us. So it's absolutely clear that that it should be, safe access. I don't believe that's the case. Apart from so clearly DM6 needs a bit of smartening up. It needs tightening up. We need to quantify what we mean by the alternative provision. We need to quantify distance, so we need to quantify safety and accessibility. So I think we need to do a bit of homework on DM6. Also, given that we already have planning permission for around 1,500 new homes in the area, with 2 more sites earmarked for housing development just around the corner, that pub is potentially going to turn into a gold mine in the right hands. So, again, those people, all those students, they'll need somewhere to go, and somewhere nearby would be, you know, so I can't support the application and I'll be voting against it.
The council's solicitor would like to respond to something there, which I'm going to allow.
Thank you, Chair. There was a point made there about a decision in this application potentially breaching the equalities legislation. Just to reiterate the points I made before, a decision to grant or refuse permission in this case would not be a breach of that legislation. What was the previous breach was a failure to have due regard to the duty under the legislation, and as long as this committee has that due regard today, then the requirements of the Equalities Act are met.
But surely that is a nonsense if that means we fail to take into account the potential impact the decision will have on particular groups, women, LGBTQ. If we can't take that into account, I thought the whole point, I mean, I have a hidden disability, I have ADHD, okay? Hidden disability, protected characteristic under the Equality Act. You know, the whole point of the Equality Act is that these factors and the impact they have are taken into account in the decisions that we make. If we're then told, oh, as long as we've nodded towards the Equality Act, it doesn't actually matter what we then do and the impact of what we then do, then it's a nonsense. The whole point of the Equality Act is to actually take decisions in the light of it. So if a decision is going to be disadvantageous to women, vulnerable people, LGBTQ, because it put them more at risk of harm because of the routes they have to use to get to alternative facilities, then surely that is a factor that I have to take into account.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with you, Fabian. As a fellow neurodiverse person and also a non-binary person, you know, and somebody perceived female, you know, it's a very important consideration to take into mind, and I trust that our committee will do that today, so have no fear on that. I think, personally, I'm not remotely convinced that the other provision is suitably diverse and satisfies the needs of the community, which is quite clearly demonstrated by the strength of the public forum showing that we've got today. On terms of public, it being viable, you could, for example, run a shop like I do, and I could take a retail building and then just not open it or just sell one really random thing, but that makes my business model unviable, not the building. So I feel like the viability report that we've been provided is entirely inadequate for this argument. So I think in terms of DM6, it is demonstrably viable, and it demonstrably satisfies a provision that's needed for the local community that the other pubs do not provide. So I think on both counts of DM6, this has to be refused. Guy and then Chris, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just before, I'd just like to reassure my colleague that in terms of the Equalities Act, the fact that he's just said what he said is evidence that he has applied his mind to it. He has given it due regard and the Act hasn't been breached. So I think we're all onto a bit of a winner there. I have to agree with the Chair. I cannot... We have 30-something people saying that there is not a diverse range of public house provision existing within the locality. Just because those terms are not particularly defined within our planning policy doesn't mean we can just interpret them as broadly as we like and say, well, a kilometre could be within a walking distance, 2 kilometres. What would be to say within the boundaries of the city is within a reasonable walking distance? So at some point we have to make a decision as to what that is. And it strikes me that the people who live in the area are saying there isn't a reasonable provision within a walking distance. That seems to, it has persuaded me that DM6 section 2 isn't fulfilled. I don't believe for a second that DM6 1 is fulfilled. It strikes me that the pub is seems perfectly viable, and the level of interest in it and interest in saving it seems to demonstrate it's a well-loved, treasured community asset that's in need of protection. And I have to admit, I'm also not particularly persuaded on DM5. So I'm open to being persuaded by colleagues, but at the moment I think I'm joining Councillor Breckles and Councillor Stafford Townsend in voting to reject.
Chris, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. Carried away listening to everything that's been said. First thing I'd just like to say is that I was impressed by the quality of the representations made by the people sitting in the what we call the public benches up there. I thought they were very well prepared, very well presented, and I know it's not easy for people who are not used to regularly speaking in public to actually come along and give up their afternoon to do something that they may feel a little uncomfortable with before they start. But thank you for what you've done, because it makes our job a lot easier to try and understand everything that's going on, because that's not always easy. So I thank you for that. The other point that I would like to make is that I've sat here listening to what's been said, and I feel I would be very uncomfortable with supporting the officer's decision. I don't feel that the officer has pursued all the information that could have been made available. The officer may not agree, but I do not feel qualified to take a decision on the information that we've so far received, because there are so many negatives involved that I would have to vote against the recommendation of the officer. Thank you.
My understanding is that the process we have to follow is, first of all, to vote on whether to accept the officer's recommendation. And if my colleagues are agreeable to that, I propose that we vote on that.
That is the convention.
But there needs a seconder.
You need to second it.
And if there isn't one,
then we can pass straight to refusal. So would anybody like to propose that we vote for the officer's recommendation?
I do. I propose we vote on the officer's recommendation.
Does anybody second that? No. Okay, so that falls. Now, so what's happened now is that the officer's recommendation to approve this planning permission has not been granted, so we'll move to the next stage of the process. Andrew did want to speak, but I don't know if that's now mute, and now Guy would like to say something. Do you want to say something?
Well, no, let's move on. I was probably going to repeat some points that had already been made.
Okay, fabulous. Who would like to give me a motion?
I will give you a motion to defer our decision, which I believe is that...
No!
I'm just going to request clarifications from the officers and from the chair that under circumstances like this, the general protocol of this committee is to defer to enable officers to look further into the report. This is not a negative sign. This is a... Chair, would you clarify, please? I think I'm being helpful, but I want to check.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the preferred routes, and I'm sure Gary's about to say otherwise. Yeah. But we don't have to do that either. And personally, I feel like we've already had this at committee several times and gone around in a circle. It'd be quite good to draw a line. Yeah, I think so too. Legally, you happy?
Yes, Chair. Obviously, the committee process, which you don't have to follow, of course, is on page 6 of the papers. But one of the reasons for that is not to give officers another attempt at trying to convince you. I don't think that's going to be at all possible, so it wouldn't be with that motivation at all. It's just to absolutely ensure, because this is likely to go to appeal, the committee and the public forum will want an appeal to have the best chance as possible of being successful, is to ensure that those reasons are drafted, or a reason is drafted in a way that is as robust as possible. and stands the best chance. So that would be the main motivation for going away and bringing back a brief update report with a suggested reason for refusal. But it's up to the committee, of course, how you wanted to proceed.
Yeah, and I think we're probably quite clear on the reasons why we'd like to defer it, because we have gone some very helpful, very clear notes for the reasons why, what we need to consider, Richard. So I think we could probably, as a committee, make those reasons for refusal quite clear.
In which case, Chair, I'll suggest that we reject on the basis of DM6.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, did you want to... You were waving at me.
Well, I was just going to suggest pretty much the same thing, but do we need to have a debate to firm up our reasons for rejecting under DM6?
That probably makes sense, and then we can have the discussion about making sure it's watertight here and now, and then we can go home and it's done.
Oh no, we've got one more left to do, but then we go home.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, but I mean, those in the public gallery, once it's done, they can go home and settled. Okay, so I think the issue is diverse range. We reject that part. We don't believe that that is the case. I think it makes sense to refer to the Equality Act because those routes particularly. You're saying no.
Andrew had his hand up first. Okay, go on then, Guy.
Begging the Chair's pardon, if the officers would like to restate the arguments that they've heard so far in order of salience, that would be much appreciated by the committee.
Yes, certainly happy to help. First of all, you don't want to be saying that it's in breach of the Equalities Act because you're then providing your own decision, making that wide open to another legal challenge. So as long as you've had regard to those issues in making the decision we're about to make, you're okay. So from what has been said extensively during the committee meeting, you made reference to the application not being in accordance with policy DM6, and from what I've heard, it's on both aspects. So it is that you feel that it hasn't been demonstrated that the public house is no longer economically viable, and also that you feel that there isn't a diverse range of public house provision within the locality. You have challenged what locality means, and we understand it's not 800 metres, it's shorter than that, and also has been referenced to safe routes from the locality to those potential alternative public houses, and particularly reference to groups with protected characteristics as well. So hope we could draft one reason for refusal encapsulating that.
Go on then, Guy, then Andrew. Okay, decide between you.
I think we need to reject on those grounds, and as the officer made clear, it's an or situation in the policy considerations, so we need to reject on both the grounds. The criteria up there says the public house is no longer economically viable, but what the 2.6.3 in the policy states is that it should be. I've lost it now. The proposed applicants will need to provide evidence clearly showing the pub is no longer economically viable, and I don't think that's been demonstrated. Certainly not for a pub as a standalone pub, divorced from the rest of its group. And it also says viability assessments must include analysis of trade potential, and I don't believe that's been shown to us either. So I think those are the grounds on which we can reject for that policy consideration. And then the second policy consideration, I was very struck by the officer earlier on when he quoted the supporting text, when it says that they will need to provide evidence of a range of pubs in the locality that can collectively continue to meet the needs and expectations of the whole community. And I don't think that's been demonstrated, because although there's a number of other places selling alcohol in the area, a lot of them are lengthy walks away, as the public representations have made clear. A lot of them are potentially unsafe walks for women and other minorities. And and they are of a diverse range of provision, but few, if any, replicate the offer that the Windmill had. So, and therefore don't meet the needs and expectations of the community.
Guy?
I was just going to throw DM5 in there as well. I don't think that the 4 tests under DM5, 2, 3 and 4 are in dispute. I don't think anyone's claiming that those tests are met. But in terms of 1, the loss of the existing community use would not create or add to a shortfall in the provisional quality of such uses within the locality. I think a lot of the discussion has centred around there being some characteristics of this premises because of the accessibility, because of the sort of layout of the premises, because of the kind of friendliness of the area and the terrain and everything else, that there is something specific about this premises that is very difficult to replace and can't be replaced by what is in the surrounds, and that we can argue then that DM5 test 1 isn't met either, but I would certainly welcome officers' guidance on it.
Yes, Chair. I think this is one of those examples where it's probably best to focus on your best argument rather than have an add-on argument which might undermine the other one. So it's my advice, if you're going to refuse it on DM6 in the terms that have been discussed rather than DM5, but it's up to you.
Okay, so are you so are you satisfied that we've got enough there, Gary, to be nice and robust? Excellent. Then I would like to propose that we reject on the basis of DM6.
Seconded.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I snuck and stole it. Okay. Oliver, do you want to do a roll call or should we do a show of hands? Go on then. Okay. So motion to reject. All in favour, wave your arms in the air. So thank you very much. So no permission and pub stays as a pub. So thank you very much for coming, everybody in the gallery. We're going to have a comfort break and you can go to a pub now. Thank you very much. Committee back by 4:05, please. Hello, are we all back? I think we are. Fabian? Thanks. Okay, I think we're all back, so we will get started. So we're moving on to Romney House, and we have 4 public forum speakers. So the first person we have is, I am apologising for my pronunciation of your name, Leila Farzakina. Is that correct, vaguely? Oh, she's not here. Okay. Don't tell her how I mangled her name. Steve Baker, please.
Is it on? Yes, it is. Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick statement from the applicant. I'm Stephen Baker from Gorham Homes. We wanted to come along today to reassure the committee that when they're looking at the matter relating to the M4-2 units, this is not a change from the application that was put forward. This is a clarification in a drafting error on the report. So we are clarifying that there will be a difference of the delivery numbers of the fully compliant M42 units, but the scheme itself has not changed. It is just that there was an interpretation based on information provided by us as the applicant that made its way wrongly into the report and overstated the amount of fully compliant M42 units. But nothing has changed. We're not seeking to make a change from the original application, just seeking to make a clarification and provide further information so that the committee are clear what is being provided.
Thank you very much. Catherine Hill, please. Oh, no, it's not on.
Hello? Oh,
yep.
Okay. I was here on the 1st of September and witnessed the misinformation you were given prior to the vote on the Reserve Matters application, and I listened intently to the discussions and concerns from committee members regarding land height. Annie, you commented that you hope that this condition will provide some comfort to residents. This wording does not represent your discussions and is an insult to us all. It provides no comfort whatsoever. It is simply another example of the planning department and developer riding roughshod over the difficult issues around the height of this area and its impact on existing residents. I consider it to be a dereliction of their duties to you as planning committee members to have so willfully ignored your intentions, and I urge you to reject this proposed condition and refuse permission until it satisfies the concerns of the committee. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Councillor Heathermack, please.
Hello. Perfect. The system is working again. As we're newly elected councillors for Lockleys, we are in support of affordable housing built on brownfield sites. In so many ways, this is a fantastic development in terms of where it's located, in terms of 50% affordable. We are in support of that. I'm dealing with a lot of housing casework. We really acknowledge the need for housing, but speaking to residents and listening to concerns, those concerns about the height and the dig down between this new development and the reasonably new development just north of it are a concern, and I sort of share the confusion, the concerns about the difference between the conditions that were stated in the last meeting and what's actually come forward in terms of what the height is and the clarity around that.
Thank you very much. And then we'll just move to the officer presentation, please, which is Gary.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm covering this item today. So, brief presentation on this. So, you'll be familiar with the address and the description of development, which is exactly the same as it was a couple of meetings ago. And you'll be familiar as well with the application site, both in terms of its red edge, its location, and also there's a aerial photograph, which of course is out of date because of course the buildings that existed on the site have now been demolished. A number of members joined us on a site visit just prior to the previous consideration of this application, so that's there just for reference, really. Our starting point really is the resolution that you made at your meeting on the 1st of September, and so the full resolution is there on the screen, and that is that you resolve that the Reserve Matters application be approved. You resolve that the Section 106 agreement heads of terms to be amended to include an additional provision of 150,000 towards relevant transport mitigation measures, which I think were on-site parking measures. So that was a sort of additional consideration that officers had assessed and the committee had endorsed in your consideration last time around. The third point then was a general one where we haven't, in a case where we haven't listed all the conditions, and we hear your request going forward, you want more reports with the full conditions listed. So that will be happening in future. But at that point of time, we didn't have that. So we'd asked for the resolution to include that officers are given delegated authority to finalise those conditions. So that authority was given to us. And this is the primary reason why we're here again is item 4, which was because there were concerns about the levels issues in terms of what's there at the moment, what finished floor levels could be like. So your resolution was, as it sets out there, that we were to include a planning condition requiring confirmation of the finished floor levels of the dwellings built compared to the existing ground levels, particularly where the ground levels at the site appear to be raised above their previous level. And you'll recall this was especially over this side of Romney Avenue, where I think there'd be an additional soil put there. So what in particular we'd be looking for is a comparison between what the existing land levels are at the moment, albeit they're quite artificial, and then the finished floor levels of the dwelling, and then you take the height of the approved dwellings from that. So that's a level of detail that we didn't have at the reserve matter stage, but we would require via condition, and that was your resolution. And then the additional point was the details pursuant to the discharge of the planning condition. So this is when the developer is coming forward and saying, right, okay, the existing land levels are this, and therefore on a plot by plot basis, the finished floor levels of the dwellings will be as follows. Then we can make an assessment of what the change is, and therefore, those would be the details pursuant when that planning condition is sought to be met, but to be reported back to members before the condition is discharged, so that you can cast an eye over it as well, and we say, this is what the ground levels are at the moment, including the raised level. These are the finished floor levels of the dwellings, and that the height of the dwellings will be taken from that finished floor level. So that was a level of detail that members thought was necessary. I completely concur that it is necessary, and so we're here today with the wording of that condition, because the permission's not been issued yet. Section 106 agreement hasn't been completed yet, but it's close. We assume those planning conditions submissions will come in very soon. So we're here today with the wording of that condition, which will set out that requirement very clearly. And so this is set out in the papers as well. So this is the wording of the condition. I must say it's fairly standard in terms of dealing with sites where there are a variety of levels. So it does say prior to the construction of foundations, so at that key point in time, general arrangement plan indicating the existing surveyed ground levels of the site and the proposed finished floor levels of the development shall be submitted and approved by the local planning authority. And by virtue of your resolution, that's in liaison with yourselves as members. And it says thereafter the development shall be completed in accordance with the approved details. So whatever gets approved at that stage is then the approved plans, and the development has to accord with it. And the reason given for that is in the interest of residential amenity and to ensure that all works associated with the proposed development are in accordance with that subsequent assessment. So that's the level of detail we've got to at the moment. So I do stress we're at the stage where we want to agree the wording of the condition with you, rather than here are the details, here's the existing ground levels, here's the proposed finished floor levels, because we simply don't have them at the moment. So that's a key aspect of the recommendation we're making today. Whilst we're here, though, we are also making 2 corrections to the information that was provided at the application stage and therefore existed at the committee stage as well. One is more significant than the other. The most significant one relates to lifetime home standards, which is part M4 brackets 2 of the building regulations, not to be confused with M4 brackets 3, which is wheelchair fully accessible. The paperwork that was submitted with the application stated that all units were M42 compliant. Through subsequent assessment and information received, however, it is clear that not all are compliant, because essentially to be lifetime homes, whilst the internal arrangements of the dwellings may well comply with that level of the building regulations, as soon as there's stepped access to any of those homes, then you can't say hand on heart that they are M42 compliant. And therefore, in a development that is probably striking the right balance, I think, in terms of making good use of urban land, but without being excessive, you have units that fall into two categories. We have 10 FOGs, which is flat over garage. That's a good way of utilising what might otherwise be dead space for living accommodation. But of course, as they are above garages, you're not going to get to them without going up steps. Equally, whilst there are a lot of houses on the scheme, there are also apartments, and those apartments are not to the extent that it's viable to have lifts in them, and therefore those apartments above ground floor also are accessed via steps. And so there's a total of 97 units on the site, therefore, that do, whilst they do accord with M42 in all other regards, they are accessed via steps, so we can't say they are fully M42 compliant. And so then, in terms of percentages then, this means that it's 64% that are compliant with lifetime homes rather than 100%. That's not unusual in a site where you're making the most of the land and you having upper story units. And in terms of the affordable elements, that's a very similar percentage as well. So it's not as if the affordable units are having a disproportionate amount of non-lifetime homes. It's pretty much exactly 64 as well with those. And then the final bit of clarification as well, and this is a good clarification, there are, I think it's 10 units that are 4-bedroom, 6-person units. The information provided with the application set out that they were of a certain gross internal area. I mean, every unit on the site is compliant with the national described space standards. It's come to light, though, that those units are actually a metre larger in internal area than previously submitted. So actually, that's a good thing, really. So, but whilst we're making corrections to the submitted information, I thought we would add that in as well, so we're all clear as to what the proposal is completely. And so, therefore, the recommendation is that the following condition, as I've described, is accepted and is the one that controls the levels on the site, and is the one that requires information to be submitted and assessed and approved in the normal way, and therefore, and that the rest of the contents of the report, including the corrections, are noted. So that's my presentation on that one, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Much. We'll go for then Fabian, please.
Thanks, Chair. My recollection is that the concern that the committee had, certainly the concern I had, was specifically with regards to the height of the properties abutting Hermitage Wood Road, and the concern, and there was at one point there was an officer suggestion that some of that land along Romney Avenue, which is where it's piled up, that it's due to be removed. There was a suggestion that some of that might be redistributed elsewhere on the site. And my understanding is that the condition is really about making sure that those houses which are contentious in their height aren't built any higher than the existing ground level. And I'd like to see that sort of more specific in the condition.
Yes, Chair, I understand that concern. That certainly wouldn't be my expectation, and it would be, certainly not. I think the wider concern that was visited was that there would be a dig down of the whole site, which was explained at the time to, for reasons I can understand, not viable. But certainly going the other way and building up land levels would be something we'd be very alive to. But I think there is wording that we could add to that condition to absolutely ensure that it doesn't mean that the applicants could in theory propose it, but it means that we're absolutely alive to that, and also that the applicants' expectations can be managed from day one if they were going to propose such a thing. So I'm just trying to think on the spot here what that good wording would be, but it will because at the moment it's focused on the difference between existing survey ground levels and proposed finished floor levels of the development. I could put with particular reference to any increase in existing ground levels. Maybe that would be the thing that really flags it. That's something we should be looking at anyway. And we were not expecting the development, especially when the land's been built up, to to follow that, because that would look very odd. But yeah, it's the redistribution point, I think, is the one that strikes a chord.
Yeah, thanks. I want to be. I've got an email that through from Gorham, and I think some of the points. I mean, the point that needs stressing is that there's absolutely no. There was an administrative error in the report, but there's actually no change in what's proposed when it comes to properties policy DM4. Which is 2% new housing within residential development of 50 dwellings or more should be designed to be wheelchair accessible or easily adaptable for residents who are wheelchair users. And on this site, 64% of those properties, which is which is great. 64% about the properties rather than 2% will be compliant, which I think is fantastic. I think the reason why it wouldn't be practical for them all to be fully DM compliant is it says here, no lifts are proposed within the buildings. However, it's recognised within the Urban Living SPD that lift installation, management and maintenance can be costly and therefore could be avoided as a way to reduce service charge management costs. And that'll obviously impact on affordability for people, because obviously service charges with flats need to be reasonable. Furthermore, lift access is not considered to be necessary given there are no communal areas that require access by all residents other than those at the ground floor level. Bin storage, open space, car parking, all of which is at the ground floor. So I think I'm, very relaxed about this. I think we just need to make sure that whatever we do doesn't hold up a very, very important development that is going to provide much needed housing and much needed affordable housing in this city.
Do we have any more questions? Because you're sort of straying into debate there.
Yeah, so what's the time? The plan is that when they get the plans of the actual final height of the land and the floor height, that will come back to committee again. Is that the intention?
Certainly as a first stage, we'd bring it to the agenda meeting as a first kind of, test the water kind of conversation. And then we'll take the steer from members as to where we go next.
Okay, do we have any idea of how long that would... when is that likely to be? When are we likely to be at that stage?
It's really difficult for me to say, really, because that's in the hands of the applicants who are awaiting the planning permission. I understand we're very close to completion of the 106 agreement. I understand, from all parties they want to get on with it quickly. So my rough guess it'd be in the first quarter of the next calendar year at the latest. Because we're into almost done with November. It probably won't be before Christmas, but I imagine it will be early stages of next year, because both Gorham and Vistry want to get on with the site, and the timing of the condition though is prior to the construction of foundations. I mean, I'd hope that we'd get it not on a just-in-time basis. We'd get it really early, because it's obviously a really contentious issue. So, and we've got to factor in the decision-making period. So I think with the applicants in the room, I would say we'd want to see that sooner rather than later.
Any other questions?
Can I propose we agree with the officer recommendation?
Does anybody want to have a debate about it before we go to that stage? No? Okay. What I would say, before we do go to the vote, is just, I think we all support the need for more social housing, and there's, on the face of it, is a good development. To be able to move swifter, especially seeing as Gorham will be bringing more applications in the future, it would be good if applications were fully thought through and considered before it reaches us, and then that wouldn't result in it having to come back to the committee. I think that would be what they would prefer and what we would prefer as well, because it's quite disappointing that the application that we originally voted on isn't the one that it's turning into. So I'd like that noted for the record of more thought, thinking through of the actual application before we get it would be good, please.
Noted, Chair. I think that applies to all parties involved in the application process. So.
Yes, indeed.
Chair, I think I slightly disagree with that. I think there was an error in the document saying all the flats were disabled accessible, and clearly that isn't the case. And, we should have realised that when we were looking at the site. But actually what's proposed hasn't changed. There hasn't been any reduction in affordables or accessible or anything. It's what we agreed in September is what's being put forward now. It's just we've now got the condition about floor heights worded for us to approve, and we've now got clarification on how many houses actually comply, how many dwellings actually comply with DM4.
Yes, but if an application that we're considering says 100% accessible, then that is what we're considering as the application, when in actual fact it's 64%, which is still great. Obviously 100% would be better, but it's still good. Like there's not an issue. It's just that it would be good to make sure that those errors in the original application were not there at the point that it came to the original committee, is my point. Okay, should we move to a vote, or Tony?
Sorry, Chair, I just want to double check something. If we approve this recommendation, if my understanding is correct, is that the proposed finished floor levels of the development that will be presented back to DCB leads or development committee leads, and if it felt it didn't meet the requirements that we intended with the recommendation, there would be the option to bring that to a committee.
That's correct. Basically, members still have that control by virtue of your previous resolution, and this isn't seeking to dilute that at all. We have to bring back those details back to members. So the first stage would be the agenda meeting, and then, depending on the steer taken at that meeting, this committee.
Okay, thank you. Andrew?
But for absolute clarity, what you're saying is if we sit around the table, virtual table, at DCB leads and say, we're fine with that, it doesn't have to come back to the committee if the leads all agree.
That's correct. But as members, you will have that final say on that.
Thank you. Yep, Guy.
At which point I'll second my colleague's proposal.
Great, thank you. Do you want to do a show of hands of this? All those in favour of following officer recommendation? Thank you very much. Okay, so that draws our meeting to a close, and we meet again in January. Thank you very much.